And Amy. Amy is here again. Amy is an independent curator, artist, and writer who's based in San Francisco. She's also on the board of directors of the Friends of the Ixchel Museum that helps preserve indigenous Guatemalan weaving traditions. And she's a regular contributor to Fiber Art Now magazine. I met Amy when she was working as the curator of exhibitions at the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles. She was there from 2016 to 2022. She just recently left. And she organized shows around fashion, world textiles, and contemporary fiber art. So we are thrilled to welcome again, Amy DiPlacido. Yay, Amy, take it away. I need to stop sharing.
Yes, thank you so much, Ruby. And just give me a moment as I share my screen. So can everybody see that in full screen? Great, thank you so much. Okay, well, thank you again. And coming to you from San Francisco today, where it is very gloomy and I hear some leaf blowers out to the side too. So I'm gonna maintain my focus for this very important topic. I just want to thank Devin, Ruby, our sponsors, and San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles for having me back here. And just like I mentioned in the last two talks, I'll be having the same format, which is around 45 minutes of a presentation, and hopefully we'll have 15 minutes at the end for Q&A and discussion. And in terms of the content of my work here, I'm going to be showing famous works from art history, projects that I've actually worked on at San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, and pieces from the permanent collection that I have found through our database. Some I have seen before in person and some I have not. My fun fact is that during the pandemic, I learned how to use social media. So I have those here on the first slide. And I started a social media presence called The Hungry Curator. And I'm most active on Instagram, but I have focused on travel, lifestyle, restaurants, and food. So of course, if you want to stay in touch that way, it's here. And if you want to stay in touch more about art and curatorial, you can follow me on Amy DiPlacido, but I figured I'd just share that with you because it's our last meeting, or the last time you'll see me, at least in this hour. So as we focus on the theme of social justice today, I do want to give some warning that we'll be covering themes of gun violence, the Confederate flag, and the AIDS epidemic. However, I will not be showing anything graphic, but I just want to put that out there before I begin. The word craftivism is a portmanteau of the words craft and activism. In 2003, Betsy Greer coined the term craftivism and defined it as a way of looking at life where voicing opinions through creativity makes your voice stronger, your compassion deeper, and your quest for justice more infinite. Crafting can be lighthearted and simply just that, but craftivism is putting the same actions to work toward a fair society for all. As crafting is a non-threatening and fun medium to work in, it's also an easy entry point to get people to stop, think, and act on global poverty, inequalities, and injustice. And most importantly, anyone can be a craftivist in their own way. For centuries, women have used the domestic arts to gather, educate, protest, and connect. So it is not too surprising that craftivism was born at a grassroots level. And although women were traditionally running households, cleaning, and raising children, there was still time made to get together for quilting, embroidery, and other crafts. And here women could gripe, brainstorm, and organize. So I think of this as kind of the beginnings of craftivism in the home. But now I'd like to turn our direction to the work of Shannon Downey, who works under the name Badass Cross Stitch, who so nicely encapsulate craftivism through independent and community-based projects. Shannon believes that embroidery, which is her main medium, is an amazing tool for creating digital and analog balance in your life, providing the opportunity to express yourself, slowing down in general, creating space to think substantively about real issues, and using your hands much in the same way as you use your devices, thereby bypassing the tactile need that our digital addictions demand to stop the scroll, if you will. Plus, it's easy to learn, fun to do in community, the material cost is minimal, and most importantly, it is joyful to use a medium that has historically been used as a tool of subjugation, as a tool of subversion. And I really like how she worded that. While I really enjoy this embroidery about injustice, it unfortunately comes with some controversy. The Social Justice Sewing Academy, which is a nonprofit that we'll talk about later in the hour, designed this block for the January 2020 National Quilt Museum's Block of the Month Club. The sewing challenge depicts a number 2 pencil erasing the IN from the words injustice. Some members of the club objected to this block, claiming it introduced biased opinions into the group, which is made of over 13,000 people. Unfortunately, the block sparked a heated conversation online, with some quilters outraged that the block was so political. Some quilters insisted that the museum keep politics separate from quilting, but I'd like to think that there have been many examples just in this last couple of days alone that I've shown that are politically motivated or inspired. This intolerance led to some quilters adapting the quilt block to spell out something different completely. It led to pictures of a pencil writing the word love, and another rearranging the letters to create just be nice with a picture of a bee. The ordeal led to an article in the Washington Post, TV press coverage, dozens of articles online, and the National Quilts Museum, which is based in Paducah, Kentucky, had to come out with the following statement. Frank Bennett, former CEO, said, "Let's be an inclusive community and consider voices differently from our own. Let's embrace our diversity and show the world our humanity." Later, he reminded his constituents the history of quilting being tied to movements to end slavery, promote suffrage, and eradicate AIDS. The story is a contemporary example of high tensions in America, the passion behind quilters and their medium, and a reminder of the growth still needed towards tolerance movements. For the March of Science event, Heidi Arhes, a postdoctoral fellow at Stanford University, designed the Resistor Knit Hat, which featured a circuit within a battery and 3 resistors in series to increase the resistance. Resistors are commonly used in electronics to slow down the electrical current. The 4 vertical lines on the hat represent the battery, while the zigzag represents resistors. Her design received thousands of shares online. She says, "I never associated knitting with having as much power as my science, and now I'm realizing it really does. Knitting is a way that I can reach people." Around 2017, when this knitting project became a viral sensation, many scientists found the administration's disregard for scientific facts troubling. Many people marched at this time to support the overwhelming evidence that climate change is real, it's caused by humans, and the undisputed evidence that vaccines are not only safe, but they are the best way to protect our communities from disease. And this is all before the COVID-19 pandemic. I particularly love this photo of a March for Science participant in San Francisco with the resistor hat and the Don't Unravel science shell, which I believe is an original design and a great fiber pun in general. This is another example of knitters using their chosen craft towards activism. Sometimes craft can speak louder than words, and this definitely resonates through this astonishing image. The Danish artist, Marianne Jørgensen, organized and stitched a giant pink tank blanket from hand-knit squares. The squares were created by hundreds of supporters, and the cozy was placed over an M24 Chaffee combat tank to protest war. The authoritative and intimidating visual statement of a tank is completely disarmed by the pink cozy, literally softening it, and powerfully refuses the propagandist nature of its original intention. Outraged that her country had gotten involved with the US-Iraq war, the artist wanted to manage her anger through something she was familiar with, like knitting. Word spread, and eventually, Marianne had local and international volunteers helping her knit pink squares. When the blanket was finally finished, it was wrapped around the tank, becoming a symbol of the pointlessness of war. Marianne explains that knitting symbolizes home and family, so this pink blanket greatly contrasts with the tank and makes a mockery of battle. And I think that pom-pom as the stand-in projectile does a really good job of that ridicule particularly. The artist says, for me, the tank is a symbol of stepping over other people's borders. When it is covered in pink, it becomes completely unarmed and loses its authority. Pink becomes a contrast in both material and color when combined with the tank. Artist Donna Ruff spent her early career in graphic design, learning how to communicate effectively, but her cut paper newspaper work is all about obscuring information. Ruff's Migrant series uses cover pages from the New York Times as a point of pause. She has reshaped the newspapers with intricate cutouts that offer an alternative reading. Her hand-cut templates prioritize images over journalistic framing, and in a sense, people over politics. Her intricate patterns reflect designs found in Moorish tile work and screens found in the Middle East, Spain, and North Africa. And many of the articles and corresponding images cover migration. The artist says, since 2011, I've worked with newspapers cutting patterns from the vanishing print editions, creating a dialogue of positive and negative space, and determining what image and text remains for the viewer to engage with. I'm interested in content, but I'm also interested in aesthetic beauty. My intention to highlight both is always evident, but at the center of my effort is to partially subvert the narrative so that the viewer has a sense that all is not well. There's something going on that needs more attention. We all process our response to important events in individual ways, and I don't pretend that my current work changes anything, but in a new climate of news cycles racing by and attacks on the press in general, I am compelled to capture this moment in tangible form, hopefully for us to remember before we move on. Now, in my last two talks, I've mentioned that I would be using the artwork of Alexander Hernandez as the running thread, if you will, to connect all of my talks together. Hernandez lives with the positive HIV status, but he has found creative ways to weave this part of his identity into his work. Whereas someone else might be discouraged over a similar health concern, Hernandez embraces his own story and uses adversity to propel his creative career forward. An Alexander solo exhibition in Chicago, Staying Positive at Flick's Contemporary, he created works with such vibrancy and color, which was like an antidote to 2021, another troubling year for the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, those living with positive HIV status needed to be extra sensitive to the pandemic due to a compromised immune system. But the figures that Alex made for the show were resilient and strong, qualities he also brought to his personal life. And I'm gonna just play a video here.
But I kind of wanted to show, I really wanted to show this work. And so I said, okay, I'll do it, but I want to show, I want to do installation of all this body of work I'm doing about HIV identity. And so this is this is another piece that I made. And so I called it Staying Positive because, you know, we were staying, you know, as a kind of play on words on like, you know, staying positive as a way that, you know, have good thoughts, but at the same time, like realizing that positive kind of meant something else with people who are living with HIV, like, you know, like it's not curable, it's something that I have to deal with. So I wanted, it was kind of a play on word on that because it means different things to different people. And this is a gallery installation of it. And I also printed these, I printed all these other mythical creatures, like centaurs and like pterodactyls and like griffins, to kind of like show like that my pieces were kind of in a, you know, garden of earthly delights, kind of like everyone was just kind of hanging out and like in this garden, kind of like even though it was a gallery, to kind of just show like a peaceful scene. And that's also something that I've been wanting to like change about textiles, is like, how can we display these pieces differently? Like you can add different elements, you can add vinyl, you can add all these other things to kind of like change the conversation about the pieces that you're showing, and also kind of like be playful with your work. And so a lot of my work is really playful. But I kind of.
Great. Yeah, so that's Alexander Hernandez and his show, Staying Positive. And now I want to move on to the Guns Loaded Conversation show that we had at San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles. So after working as a volunteer, a programs manager, and curatorial assistant, I finally got to organize a show of my own, which was this Guns Loaded Conversation show. I was thinking about what topic is relevant in our time and what would still be in the future, since many of our art shows take around 2 to 3 years to complete after the initial brainstorming phase. I was also thinking about the role of museums, how to get members of the community talking with people they wouldn't normally interact with, and how to bring diverse audiences into our physical space. When the Columbine shooting happened, I was a child, and because I was growing up in Massachusetts, we had a state holiday, so I was actually home from school that day. When the news broke of a school shooting, I remember everyone was glued to the TV. This moment really struck me to my core, and I remember feeling terror, guilt, and confusion as a child. 17 years later, when I heard the news of the Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016, I realized that gun violence was not going away anytime soon, and I had to take action. I also understood the social responsibility that comes with being an art curator, and I knew that I had to create an exhibition about guns and all the issues surrounding them, the ownership, the politics, violence, and even the pride, sport, and heritage within our country. As the rise of gun violence divided the American public, we also knew we had to design ambitious programming to have these challenging conversations. We worked with another nonprofit organization, the Studio Art Quilt Associates, on the show to bring in quilt artists who would be open to creating work about guns. One of the artists, Sabrina Zarco, remembers the shooting at Pulse nightclub in Florida through her artwork. She says, "Many of us who are LGBT lose family the minute we begin to openly accept ourselves. We seek refuge in the welcoming, supportive, safe space of an LGBT nightclub. There we dance, laugh, cry, and support one another." That safe space was violated on June 12, 2016 at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. A gunman entered, taking 49 lives and injuring more than 50. We as a collective family mourn, grieve, and hold each other up. We take back our safe space. Why are guns that can cause this kind of massacre available? We also took a page from Nina Simon's book, The Participatory Museum, and the Museum 2.0 blog in creating this voting area. When the visitors checked into the museum, they were handed a spent shell casing and were asked to see the entire show before voting at the end. You can see this on the right. In this way, our audience's own voice was reflected in the exhibit, and they could anonymously gauge where their community stood on gun ownership and laws. I feel that my curatorial role is almost like holding a mirror up to society. I find artists and worthy projects and give them a platform where they can amplify their voice. Museums can be safe place to engage, discuss, and promote understanding. And another poignant piece that deserves this praise is by Jen Graham, called Trajectory Patterns. It is a visual representation of every mass shooting that has occurred in the United States in 2016. Using data from the not-for-profit Gun Violence Archive, Graham created a panel for each incident with 1 inch of length representing a person who was killed or wounded in that specific shooting. A hand-embroidered label is sewn onto each panel with the street address where the shooting took place. The city and state of each address was intentionally omitted, creating ambiguity for the viewer. Each shooting could have happened in any neighborhood, in any city, in any state. The fabric used for this piece consisted entirely of suiting and apparel fabrics, maintaining a human connection to the work. Mostly using wool blends, the fabrics have a weight to them, embodying the heaviness of the subject matter. And the final size was 167 feet long. And now to go back to the Social Justice Sewing Academy, which was from our first slide today. For quilter and educator Sarah Trail, the 2012 murder of Trayvon Martin and the word silencing following it was deafening beyond comprehension. Processing her grief and rage, she made a memorial quilt aptly titled Rest in Power Trayvon, which led to the creation of the Social Justice Sewing Academy. A grassroots volunteer-run organization, Social Justice Sewing Academy facilitates projects aimed at building community and addressing the consequences of systemic oppression. Said best in the artist's words, quote, "The murder of Trayvon Martin, the 17-year-old unarmed teen who was deemed suspicious by George Zimmerman for walking through a gated community where his father lived in Sanford, Florida, ignited outrage throughout America. When I learned that Trayvon was only 14 days older than me, I was shaken to the core because he could have been me or any one of my friends. His death illuminated how society perpetuates a sense of Black unbelonging and authorizes and empowers anyone with white skin to violate Black citizenship rights through racial profiling and other intrusive forms of surveillance and policing. The Rest in Power Trayvon quilt is the first time I mixed my passion for quilting with social justice art, a mix that has made the Sewing Academy what it is today. Through a series of hands-on workshops in schools, prisons, and community centers across the country, Social Justice Sewing Academy empowers youth to use textile art as a vehicle for personal transformation, community cohesion, and becomes an agent for social change. Many of the young artists explore issues such as gender discrimination, mass incarceration, gun violence, and gentrification. The Generation of Change, a movement, not a moment exhibit was actually on view at San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles hallway gallery at the same time as the Guns Loaded Conversation show. It was their first museum show, and before we worked with them, they experienced resistance to showing youth art in a gallery setting. In fact, this show was more emotional for the adults once they learned that all of the makers were under 18. On display were children's point of view as they dealt with fears of injustice, police brutality, and colorism. The Rest in Power Trayvon quilt was also on view and moved people to tears. But I'm happy to share that the Social Justice Sewing Academy has grown from a local nonprofit to an activism project unto itself, now known around the world. And because you guys are educators, I'll just share a little bit about Social Justice Sewing Academy's process as they work with kids. So first, the students learn about social justice and they identify a cause that they are passionate about. For example, environmental degradation, the wage gap, racial profiling, etc. And then they sketch a couple of compositions of the quilt that speaks to their cause. Then they select the fabric, cut it out, and pin or baste it down using a glue stick. Finally, they write a letter with their intention and any design instructions. The letter and the quilt block gets mailed to a volunteer sewist. and they'll stitch everything in place and try to be as true to the original design as possible. And then it gets sent back to Social Justice Sewing Academy, whose headquarters are in Antioch, California. It would be challenging to do all of this in one day-long workshop, but older students might be able to do some of the stitching themselves. So just to say, the children aren't actually doing a lot of the stitching or quilting, but they are in charge of the concepts and the layout of the overall design. And the Remembrance Project is a community art project that creates activist art banners for local and national organizations to remember those lost to violence. The project remembers those lost to authority violence, officer-involved shooting, community violence, victims of gang violence or neighborhood or drive-by shootings, race, like hate crimes, racially motivated, and gender and sexuality violence against LGBTQ+ and domestic violence, etc. If you are interested in getting involved, there are many ways to start through their website. And many times the families of the victims will actually donate their clothing so that people can actually make this quilt project based on that fabric material. I curated these two exhibits as my own weapon of choice when I was feeling powerless as an average citizen. Much to my surprise, the exhibition received much attention and showed that, like me, the public needed a place to reflect and discuss this intense and deeply divisive issue. The museum received emotional testimony from visitors. We hosted several unique public programs and even sponsored a gun buyback in collaboration with the San Jose Police Foundation. We launched a Kickstarter so that we could help in the cost of giving everyone who turned in a gun $100. We also urged the community to donate a handmade quilt to the museum, and each participant received a new quilt and cash upon exchanging their gun. And moving into a subject matter that's a little bit lighter, this is Mass MoCA, which is one of my favorite museums in Western Massachusetts. And this is artist Dave Cole. Artist Dave Cole was in residence at Mass MoCA with his project, The Knitting Machine, which was 2 excavators specially fitted with massive 20-foot knitting needles. The product of the knitting machine was an oversized American flag, a flag which could be seen as both a celebratory gesture of pride and also commentary on America's role in world affairs circa 2005. When the flag was removed from the knitting machine, it was folded into the traditional flag triangle and was on display in an oversized presentation case. The installation took place over the period of 1 week, during which time he knit the entire flag, approximately 500 stitches, with the machines. The artist says, "The knitting machine combines the feminized domestic American tradition of knitting with the grandiose gesture of construction, usually associated with masculine labor. The knitting machine challenges familiar notions of labor and production while expressing a complex understanding of patriotism." Cole's work is about the repetition of gesture, the challenge of material limitation, and the creation of delightful, unexpected objects. And let's see if we can play this video, which is seeing the knitting machine in action. I knew I had to throw in a little bit of humor so we don't get too heavy during our talk. Okay. So now to transition to the poignant work of Sonia Clark, who you might be familiar with. For her work Unraveling, Sonia Clark chose a high quality flag woven from thick, sturdy cotton and stitched together to last. In gallery performances, she invites visitors to work with her side by side to unravel the flag by hand, carefully taking it apart thread by thread. Together, they dismantle about 1/2 inch in an hour, creating piles of red, white, and blue thread. She says, just slowing down to think about what has happened here. It took years for us to make the Confederate flag. It's not going to be an easy thing for us to undo. The symbolism here is that the physical flag is woven out of cotton. So in the act of unraveling, it's similar to the detailed action of picking cotton, which of course helped build the American South. There's also the visible labor of, quote, doing the work, which is sometimes said in order to learn how to build an anti-racist world. In Interwoven, these small, mass-produced, cheap, but ubiquitous flags used at parades and other events still hold power. Even when they are unwoven, the ghost image remains. When they're woven together, the ghosts of our American history remain eerily intact. On March 30th, 2019, artist Sonia Clark activated the second floor galleries of the Fabric Workshop and Museum with a symbolic reversal. For this one-time performance, the gallery floor was covered with dust gathered from historic sites like Independence Hall and the Declaration House in Philadelphia. Wearing a reproduction of the dress worn by the cleaning woman Ella Watson in American Gothic, the iconic photograph by the late Gordon Parks, Sonia Clark used a Confederate battle flag dish towel, commercially available and purchased from an online vendor, to clean the floor and in turn reveal a passage of text from the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. Let's see a video of the performance, and you can also see the photograph that I just mentioned, American Gothic by Gordon Parks. So as you can tell, the video continues in this manner. So from our permanent collection at San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles is a collaborative duo called Rococo, which is a hyphenation of their names, Casey Rosenberg and Modesto Covarrubias collaborations. Rococo's artist residency was October to December of 2017, and these works went into the SJMQT collection afterwards. Together, they used their work to explore issues of social justice and contemporary culture. These wall works are referred to by the artists as collage paintings, as they are constructed from cut and combined pieces of fabric collaged together with a painterly attention to texture, color, and light. Using quotes and phrases that are familiar, famous, or even infamous on which to base this series, they continue to explore recent events in American politics, journalism, and culture. The work considers the operative root word here and questions whether its definition still holds true for the systems that bind these facets of American society. They ask, is there an action of hearing taking place, or is it more about silencing and obscuring fact, ethics, and even morals? Spiral of Silence was inspired by the US Senate when in 2017, Senators Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris were making statements and asking questions when their male colleagues attempted to silence them through obscure procedures and through the thinly guised mechanism of courtesy. Rococo asks, how many other ways are we being silenced? Who wants us to be silent? What are they afraid of hearing? What are the words they fear, and what actions might those words inspire? And now moving on, 25 million stitches became a global project when the organizer asked for 1 stitch to equal 1 refugee, needing 25 million. The 25 million stitches, 1 stitch, 1 refugee project brings awareness to refugees who have been forced to flee their homelands as a consequence of genocide, war, poverty, natural disasters, targeted violence, and other grave threats. They leave behind everything they've known and possessed in order to live. They face immense struggles, misfortunes, and perils on their journey, and through it all, they are still able to survive with hope. The embroidered panels provide a visual representation of the enormity of the human displacement crisis. Both individual and overall collection of panels have opened the hearts of the stitchers and viewers alike. The time commitment apparent in each panel reminds many viewers to stay engaged with the pressing issues that contribute to the refugee crisis. Consequently, this collection of work has the potential to speak to a much larger audience and build a more intimate understanding of the challenges refugees face that cross the borders of nations, politics, and cultures. Regarding upcoming exhibits at San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, Queer Threads will show 30 artists connected to the West Coast who are remixing fiber and textile traditions to explore contemporary LGBTQ ideas. Informed by fluidity, intersectionality, and materiality, many works present queer content fully executed through thread-based processes such as crochet, embroidery, and weaving, while others abstract these mediums through painting, photography, printmaking, and video. The exhibition, organized by independent curator John Chach, ponders how fibers and textiles uniquely provide agency for queer artists. And here's his book on the left. And on the right, in Queer Threads, will be 2 panels from the AIDS Memorial Quilt seen on the right. On October 11th, 1987, the AIDS Memorial Quilt was displayed for the first time on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., during the National March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights. It covered a space larger than a football field and included 1,920 panels. 6 teams of 8 volunteers ceremonially unfolded the quilts sections at sunrise as celebrities, politicians, families, lovers, and friends read aloud each of the names represented on the quilt. The reading of names is now a tradition followed at nearly every quilts display. 500,000 people visited the quilts that weekend. The overwhelming response to the quilt's inaugural display led to a 4-month, 20-city national tour for the quilt in the spring and summer of 1988. The tour raised nearly $500,000 for hundreds of AIDS service organizations. More than 9,000 volunteers across the country helped the 7-person traveling crew move and display the quilts. and amigos muertos, translated loosely to friends who've died, Jonathan Shannon created a tribute to those who have died from AIDS and cancer. It won the 1994 National Patchwork Championship in Great Britain, and it is recognized as one of the 20th century's best American quilts. A central field of dancing skeletons is surrounded by 17 appliqued cloth papel picados. Because of its subject matter, Amigos Muertos was submitted to a quilt show in 1994 in America and was rejected. This censorship caused an uproar in the quilt community, with many artists responding with disbelief and outrage. So in some ways, we are revisiting the concepts and what happened with the first slide that I showed, where quilts are being censored for their political undertones. Jonathan Shannon created several works honoring those who've died during the AIDS crisis. This quilt on the right is dedicated to the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus and features a photo image transfer of the group from the 1993 Stitch on its reverse side. In the photo, as in Shannon's designs, the members wearing black represent those lost to HIV/AIDS. The singers in white represent the remaining living members of their original choir. Shannon depicts the group arm in arm in this haunting and beautiful commemoration. And this is actually on view in the 45th anniversary exhibit at SJMQT right now. And I will just leave you with a quote by Mahatma Gandhi, that in a gentle way, you can shake the world. Art is meant to reflect, critique, challenge, and impact the society in which it resides. Visual art has the power to illuminate our social fabric and to reveal our deepest emotions. And on a final note, I just want to say that I hope you all here go back into the school year feeling refreshed, and I hope that some of these presentations during the conference will leave you feeling inspired, rejuvenated, and reinvigorated to try some new content in your classroom. I hope that you've learned some new textile artists and traditions to incorporate into your lessons. And thank you very much for a wonderful 3 days. And you've been such a patient audience as I try to play videos for the first time on my screen. So thank you all. And I would love to open it up to Q&A discussion now.
Thank you so much, Amy. Really fascinating view into how textile arts really does support social justice issues and can help initiate some change.
Mm-hmm.
So, questions? I was reminded when you were talking about that the first image, the injustice,
Mm-hmm.
how this is such a hot topic in museums. I'm sorry, did you say that that was related to an exhibit in a museum? The controversial part?
Yeah, so what happened was originally Social Justice Sewing Academy works with youth artists to begin with. And they actually asked the youth artists to design a block of the month club. And it goes through the National Museum of Quilting, which is in Kentucky. And I think I'm not part of this group, but I think what happens is they give the instructions and all the supplies to make this block of the month. And then at the end of the year, there's like a special award if you do all 12 for the entire year. You can win this award. And what happened was there's a Facebook group, and there's a lot of chatter on this group about the inappropriateness of putting something like politics with the quilt block too. And so, of course, like I think that it was just kind of something that the museum didn't intend or think that would ever happen, and also something that the Social Justice Sewing Academy wouldn't ever think to happen, because injustice isn't too strong of a political message we all want. I mean, I would think that we all want justice.
Yeah.
Let me
yeah.
Can I ask, can you repeat the name of the museum and the name of the National what quilt club was it? The
Yeah,
National what?
yeah, it's through the National Quilt Museum, which is in Paducah, Kentucky. And I think that they host a quilt, a block of the month club. So a block is just that like one small square
Right.
that you would put into a quilt. So I think that what might happen is that at the end of the year, they would either quilt it all together or they would kind of have an award based on how nice the quilting was. So I just wanted to show that on the right is the quilt block as it was initially intended, with that number 2 pencil being wiped out. And then Badass Cross Stitch was really inspired by the story and wanted to support Social Justice Sewing Academy. So it actually made this embroidery that I think people could also, if embroidery is more of their craft of choice, they could also kind of support the project in that way. But if you look online, there's so many articles about this. There's, quilter blogs talking about this. And I think sometimes we get a little spoiled being in California or being in the Bay Area that we probably see this and wouldn't think twice. But I think it's a reminder that maybe in other parts of the world and other parts of the country, this is a deeper issue of wanting to keep quilts separated from politics. But I'm kind of arguing here, and I think many of you would agree that it's all interrelated, it's all connected, and you can't really take the politics out of quilting. Sometimes you can just make a beautiful quilt that's just nice on the eyes, aesthetically pleasing. But I think this is kind of taking it one step further. And the fact that somebody under 18 designed this quilt block, I think says a lot about their point of view and their worldview too, that they want to put this out into the universe. So just as a reminder, we're all coming from different places.
And
Thank you.
Deborah is asking, what ages or grades do you think social justice curriculum is appropriate? And are you asking in general, generally social justice curriculum, just in general?
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Do you, well, for myself, maybe you have a different answer, Amy. I would say every age, any age, because this touches a little bit upon that conversation that we started about neutrality and what's neutral. To me, as Amy said, I would agree with that point of view about this particular work, that injustice is such a generalized concept. Why would somebody be opposed or upset about wanting to get rid of injustice and just have justice? So depends on how you define, as we tried to think about this as part of our opening, what is social justice? I mean, even for very young children, the concept of friendship and what does it mean to be a friend, that's really important to young children. And young children are also very concerned with fairness. You hear that all the time. That's not fair. That's really important. So is that a social justice issue? It depends on how you define that. So to me, those kind of do lean into that. And so even very, very young children care about that. Just to me, the concept of sharing, sharing, I always try to think of sharing when I'm trying to explain it to children in different ways. Sharing sometimes means you have one thing like a pizza and everybody gets a part and nobody's really expected to have the whole thing, and that's sharing a pizza. And sometimes sharing means taking turns. There's only one doll, so you can't both have the doll. So one has it one time, one has it another time. And sometimes sharing means you have to actually split it apart. So you want to share an apple, well, there's only one apple and now you have to cut it up. So sharing, even to me on a basic level, could be considered a concept that overlaps with social justice. So that's my personal take on that. Amy, do you have an idea about social justice and what's especially since you were in the classroom before, what ages or grades and kinds of topics and things like that?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I might defer to the educators on this, but I will say that I did teach the Hmong story cloths whenever I was a teacher, and the way that the school structured our projects was that we would just scaffold them. So like kindergarten through second grade got kind of one assignment, and so on up until 8th grade. And I'll also mention that the Social Justice Sewing Academy has gone into classrooms, I think as young as 1st grade. So I remember, this is kind of going back to 2018 now, but I remember that there was 2 group quilt projects on view, and one was like 1st to 3rd grade, and then there was one that was, you know, older students too. But I think that you're right. I think it's all subjective, and I think it also might depend on the maturity of the students too. And hopefully it's a conversation that begins in the family setting. But I know as educators, we, you know, definitely have some of that responsibility handed to us, but maybe there's probably techniques online of how to get that conversation started at home. So they're like kind of coming into the classroom knowing that maybe it's something that they're going to be talking about. Hopefully all communities work together to kind of have that, but yeah, I think it depends on the child.
I think I just also want to add that in California, at least, the history social studies state content standards explicitly talk about some of this in kindergarten. For example, standard K1 number 3 says, know beliefs and related behaviors of characters and stories from times past and understand consequence of characters' actions. So it's about consequence. And the one before that is learn examples of honesty, courage, determination, and individual responsibility. And the one before that is follow rules such as sharing, taking turns, knowing the consequence of breaking them. So that's, to me, a kindergarten version of behaving with respect, which is about justice and equality and sharing. And it goes on, every grade level kind of builds on that as well. I think anybody in California would have no trouble at any age bringing them in age appropriate, but and there are guidelines for it. I also want to point out that there are the Teaching Tolerance, which comes from the Southern Poverty Law Center, has a whole social justice standards that speaks to the different grade groups. And a lot of, there are some districts even in California that have actually adopted those as official Board of Education adopted standards to include into their, to weave through their education.
Yes, and just go ahead.
Oh, no, thank you for that. I'm so glad to know that.
Yes,
Yeah.
and Teaching Tolerance, you know, I've Southern Poverty Law Center is great. They have, that's been something they've been doing for a long time. I think that times have changed. I mean, I think that name Teaching Tolerance is over 50 years old. It's pretty dang old. And so I think they've updated a little bit, because I think when they started, tolerance was like good. Yeah, that'd be good. That'd be a really good step forward if we could just be tolerant of each other. And now I think they've moved forward and they've updated their name. And now I think they call it Learning for Justice or something else. So just a little, something to, you know, it's sort of an aside. But when you're looking for it, you'll notice that it's called something slightly different now.